Buckle up, listeners. We're diving headfirst into the world of corporate earnings today. It's Tuesday, October 16th, and let me tell you, things are getting interesting.
That's right. We've got a whole lot of company reports to unpack, some good, some not so good. But don't worry, we're here to make sense of it all.
Exactly. So yesterday, tech stocks were popping champagne, celebrating a pretty impressive rally. But this morning, well, U.S. futures are looking a little less celebratory, dipping down a bit.
And it's not just the U.S. European markets are also down today. Seems like mining and energy stocks are dragging things down across the pond.
But wait, there's always a silver lining, or should I say, a golden Nikkei.
Ah, you're talking about Japan, right? Their Nikkei index actually hit a 3-month high today.
Exactly. Makes you wonder, what's their secret? I'm guessing it has something to do with the weaker yen we've been seeing.
Yeah, a weaker yen can be a good thing for their exports, making Japanese products more affordable for international buyers.
Interesting. Okay, so we've talked big picture. Now let's zoom in on some specific companies making waves with their earnings reports. And we might as well start with, well, Bank of America.
Ah, yes, the bank that everyone loves to have opinions about.
Exactly. And their news today, well, it might explain why those U.S. futures are feeling a little down. Their profits took a bit of a tumble this quarter.
Yeah, and the main culprit seems to be shrinking interest income. It's a common theme we're seeing with banks these days.
So for those of us who don't speak finance, what does shrinking interest income actually mean?
Basically, banks make money by charging interest on loans, right? When interest rates are high, they make more money. But there's been talk of the Federal Reserve potentially lowering rates soon.
And that means banks like Bank of America might see their profits shrink even more.
Potentially, yes. And to add to their woes, Bank of America also set aside a larger provision for credit losses. Basically, they're stashing away more cash to cover potential loan defaults.
Oh, that doesn't sound too good. Does that mean they're worried about more people not paying back their loans?
It could be a sign of things to come. Maybe a little warning bell for those thinking of taking out a loan themselves.
Very interesting. Okay, enough doom and gloom for now. Let's talk about a company that's actually thriving. Johnson & Johnson, their earnings report. Basically a giant celebratory party.
They are on a roll, that's for sure. And a lot of their success is thanks to, believe it or not, their oncology drugs.
Oncology drugs, so cancer treatments.
Exactly. Their cancer treatments, particularly a drug called Darzalex, have been selling like hotcakes.
Wow. So one successful product can really make that much of a difference for a company.
Absolutely. In fact, J&J was so confident in their performance, they actually went ahead and raised their profit forecast for the year. Investors were doing cartwheels.
Now that's what I call a success story. All right, before we move on to our next company, let's talk about one that's walking a bit of a tightrope right now, United Health Group.
Oh, yes, the healthcare giant. Their earnings report was a classic case of good news, bad news.
Oh, tell me more. What's got them walking this metaphorical tightrope?
Well, let's start with the bad news, shall we? They're facing a challenge that a lot of healthcare companies are dealing with right now, rising medical costs.
And I'm guessing what's bad for them usually trickles down to us, the consumers.
Unfortunately, you're right. Higher costs for healthcare companies often translate to higher insurance premiums for everyone else. Not exactly something to celebrate.
Definitely not. But there must be some good news somewhere, right? You said it was a mixed bag.
Oh, there is. Don't worry. It's not all doom and gloom.
Okay, good. Give me the upside.
Despite those rising costs, United Health is actually seeing more and more people signing up for their healthcare plans.
So basically, they're facing this constant battle between those rising costs and, well, the growing demand for healthcare. Classic healthcare dilemma.
You got it.
Okay, so before we move on from these major players, any initial thoughts on what we're seeing? Any big takeaways, red flags, or anything that's got you feeling particularly optimistic?
Well, that Bank of America report, while not exactly a shocker, it really highlights how sensitive the financial sector is to those potential interest rate changes.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And while Johnson & Johnson, they're obviously on cloud 9 right now with all that success in oncology, but we can't forget about the bigger economic picture.
Very true. Things can change on a dime, as we all know. Okay, moving on from numbers on a spreadsheet, let's talk Boeing. Remember that ongoing strike we mentioned? Well, it seems things just got a tad more complicated.
Oh, how so?
Word on the street is that thousands more workers might be facing layoffs. And that's on top of the strike.
Oof, that's rough. And that's a perfect example of how these corporate decisions, they have a huge ripple effect. It's not just about profits, it's about people's lives.
Absolutely. Okay, speaking of real-world impacts, Coty, the company behind CoverGirl makeup, they're waving a little caution flag. They're pointing to a slowdown in U.S. spending as a potential reason for weaker sales.
Now that's something to watch closely. If one company reports a dip in sales, it might not mean much. But if we start seeing this pattern across the board, well, that's a different story. It could be a sign of broader economic trends, like consumers starting to tighten their belts.
Makes you wonder, are people cutting back on spending these days? I don't know about you, but I'm definitely thinking twice before those impulse buys. All right, are you ready for a little corporate intrigue?
Always.
Lay it on me.
Okay, so get this. Someone just offloaded a huge chunk of Deutsche Bank shares, like a massive amount. And the market is going bonkers trying to figure out why.
The classic mystery seller. Those large stock sales, they always get the rumor mill churning.
Right. Is someone losing faith in the company? Or is it a strategic move by some big-time investor? We need answers.
We may never know. The suspense is killing me. And speaking of banks under the microscope, UBS, they're still feeling the heat after that whole Credit Suisse takeover.
Yeah, that was a big one. And the regulators are definitely keeping a close eye on them. This merger basically created a financial behemoth, and they want to make sure it doesn't pose any risks to the whole system.
Makes sense. You don't want one giant bank to topple over and take everyone down with it.
Exactly. It's a bit of a domino effect. If a giant like UBS were to stumble, it could send shockwaves throughout the entire financial world.
So as we're seeing, these earnings reports, they're not just about the companies themselves, are they? It's a whole web of interconnectedness. So what would you say is the biggest takeaway from today's deep dive so far?
Yeah, it's been a real wild ride through these earnings reports, hasn't it? Some companies are throwing parties, others are, well, battening down the hatches.
That's a good way to put it. We've seen it all today. Bank of America struggling with interest income, Johnson & Johnson with their oncology victory lap. And then there's United Health, trying to find that balance between rising costs and, the ever-growing demand for healthcare.
And let's not forget those little curveballs like that Cardi report and the mystery of the Deutsche Bank share dump. Definitely gives you something to think about.
For sure. It's a lot to take in, but that's what we're here for, right?
Yeah.
Trying to cut through the noise and figure out what really matters. And you know what? This might sound crazy, but as you go about your day today, just think about those reports for a second.
What do you mean?
Well, think about how those seemingly distant corporate ups and downs, they could actually hit a lot closer to home than you might realize.
I see what you're saying.
Like those rising healthcare costs we talked about. What if that translates to higher insurance premiums for you and your family down the line? Or what about that potential slowdown in consumer spending? Could that mean your favorite brands might start raising prices?
It's all connected.
Exactly. It's all one big interconnected web. But hey, that's why we do this deep dive, right? Knowledge is power, and the more you know about what's happening in the market, the better equipped you are to navigate your own financial journey.
I couldn't agree more. Keep asking those questions, keep learning, and hey, we'll be back soon to do it all again.
You got it. Until next time, happy investing, everyone.